It wasn't a moment I'd planned. In fact, it wasn't a moment I ever thought would happen. Yet there I was, standing at the edge of a decision I couldn't quite comprehend, staring at a situation that felt surreal. How had it come to this? How had I allowed things to spiral so far out of control? Let me take you back to where it all began. I was a woman trapped in my own silence. My marriage, once filled with passion and promise, had become a series of unspoken words and unmet expectations. My husband, distant and preoccupied, seemed to drift further from me with each passing day. He wasn't cruel or harsh. He was simply absent, emotionally, physically, in every way that mattered. I tried everything to fix it. Date nights, heart-to-heart conversations, even counseling. But his heart was closed, locked away behind a wall I couldn't break through. I began to feel invisible, like a shadow of the woman I once was. And then, something, or rather, someone, shifted everything. My stepson, Ryan, moved back in with us after finishing college. He was polite, charming, and carried an air of maturity that surprised me. Over time, our conversations grew more frequent, more personal. He seemed to notice things my husband didn't. "You look tired," he'd say, his voice tinged with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" At first, I brushed it off. He was just being kind, thoughtful. But his presence became a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. He'd help around the house, make me laugh when I felt like crying, and listen when I needed to vent. Slowly, the lines between us blurred, and what should have been a simple familial bond became something far more complicated. It was a quiet evening when everything changed. My husband was working late, as he often did these days, and Ryan and I were sitting in the living room. The conversation started innocently enough, but as the hours passed, it grew deeper, more intimate. He spoke about his struggles, his dreams, his fears, and I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, not even my husband. "You deserve to be happy," he said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on mine. "You deserve someone who sees you, who values you." The words hit me like a tidal wave. For so long, I'd convinced myself that my unhappiness was normal, that it was something I just had to endure. But hearing it from him, spoken with such conviction, made me question everything. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. His words echoed in my mind, intertwining with my own doubts and desires. I felt guilty, ashamed even, for the thoughts creeping into my head. But there was also a part of me that felt alive, exhilarated. The next day, I found myself seeking his company more than ever. We'd cook dinner together, watch movies, talk late into the night. And with each passing day, the tension between us grew, unspoken, but undeniable. It was in the way his gaze lingered a little too long, the way his touch felt a little too deliberate. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have set boundaries, stepped back before things went too far. But the truth was, I didn't want to. For the first time in years, I felt seen, desired, cherished, and that feeling was intoxicating. Then, one evening, it happened. I'd had a long day, filled with the usual monotony of chores and responsibilities. My husband was, as always, nowhere to be found. Ryan noticed my exhaustion and offered to help with dinner. We worked side by side in the kitchen, the air thick with an unspoken tension. As I reached for a plate, our hands brushed. It was such a simple, innocent gesture, but it sent a jolt through me. I looked up and our eyes met. In that moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only us. Without thinking, I leaned in, and before I knew it, our lips met. The kiss was brief, hesitant, but it was enough to shatter the fragile barrier we'd been holding on to. We pulled away, both of us breathless, both of us knowing we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. But he shook his head. "Don't be. You have nothing to apologize for." From that moment on, everything changed. We tried to act normal, to pretend nothing had happened, but the pull between us was too strong, too consuming. We found ourselves stealing moments whenever we could, each one more intense than the last. It wasn't long before the guilt set in. I hated myself for betraying my husband, for crossing a boundary that should have never even been approached. But at the same time, I couldn't deny the way Ryan made me feel. He brought light into my life, a sense of joy and passion I'd thought I'd lost forever. As the weeks went on, the secrecy became unbearable. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word felt like a ticking time bomb. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And then it did. One evening, my husband came home early. He walked into the living room to find Ryan and me sitting too close, our conversation too intimate. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. I froze, panic flooding through me. Ryan, however, remained calm. "Nothing," he said smoothly. "We were just talking." But my husband wasn't convinced. He'd always been perceptive, and he could sense that something was off. Over the next few days, he watched us closely, his demeanor growing colder, more distant. The tension reached its breaking point one night when he confronted me directly. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked, his tone accusing. I wanted to deny it, to lie and protect the fragile illusion of our marriage. But I couldn't. The guilt, the shame, the weight of it all was too much to bear. "Yes," I admitted, tears streaming down my face. "There is." The fallout was devastating. My husband left that night, slamming the door behind him. Ryan tried to comfort me, but I pushed him away, consumed by guilt and regret. I'd destroyed my marriage, my family, everything I'd worked so hard to build. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of it all. I sought therapy, leaned on friends, and slowly began to rebuild my life. Ryan moved out, understanding that we both needed space to heal. Looking back, I'm not proud of what happened, but I've learned from it. I've learned the importance of communication, of honesty, of facing problems head-on instead of seeking solace in forbidden places. And while I'll always carry the scars of that chapter in my life, I've also found strength in the lessons it taught me.